Okay, good morning, everyone. The hour of convening has arrived, and I will call this what will be the second full committee meeting of the Ways and Means Committee, the Georgia House of Representatives, to order this morning. I notice we have in excess of 7 members present, so we do have a quorum. I want you to each of the members that are here with us today, if you would look in your folder, there is the subcommittee constituencies, the chair people appointed, and so forth. They're all in your blue things here. They look like this, so y'all be able to tell those. And today we're going to have first readers on looks to be about 11 or 12 bills. I hope we have the authors here. I'll just remind the committee members that we made a slight change in our rules this year over the way it has been in prior years, and then we're going to hear from the authors of the bills on first reading in the committee. The hope there is that the entire committee will have a good idea of what's in the breast of the committee from the beginning, rather than have to learn about it late in the process. So, are any questions from any committee members before we move forward? Any matters of protocol, anything before we start? Okay, well, we're going to do first readers. Mr. Secretary, if you would, House Bill 10, please.
All right, Mr. Chairman. Number 26 here. Do you want this? Is the microphone on? Do you want us to put that switch?
It is.
All right. House Bill 10. To amend Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia, annotated related to imposition, rate, and computation of income tax.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The Chair recognizes Representative McKillop to give us a 2 to 3 minute summary of your legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May it please the members of the committee. My name is Doug McKillop. I'm representative from Athens, District 115. I rise before you today to talk a little bit about House Bill 10, which is an earned income tax credit at the state level. An earned income tax credit, generally, for those of you who might not know, there is one at the federal level. It was an initiative in 1975 originally, which was touted by President Reagan as the best anti-poverty, pro-work, pro-family initiative to come out of Congress ever. It provides a tax break for 770,000 hard-working Georgians who make less than $35,000 a year. I have proposed that we institute a state earned income tax credit at the amount of 5% of the federal earned income tax credit, which would amount to $122 million in tax breaks for working Georgians. Briefly, it is a tax cut for working Georgians. It is part of the Welfare to Work incentive program instituted in the 70s. It gives poor folks an opportunity to work hard, pay less taxes, and hopefully work themselves out of poverty. It is a pro-family initiative in that it provides a larger tax break for families with children. It took 4.4 million people on a federal level out of poverty nationwide last year, with 19 states participating with their own earned income tax credit and the District of Columbia. It requires no bureaucracy, no additional government to implement. It is simply an extra line on your Georgia income tax form. It is pro-business because, as we know, folks who make less than $35,000 a year will spend nearly 100% of that $122 million locally. They will spend it on rent. They will spend it on groceries and clothing. They will spend approximately 40% of it on items which will, in fact, generate additional sales tax revenue from the state, all as outlined in the fiscal note that you've been provided. I have submitted a committee substitute, an offered substitute that would eliminate the carry-forward provision of the earned income tax credit to eliminate the $2 billion going forward. That is, it would only be for the year that you are eligible to receive it. The committee substitute would eliminate any carry-forward provision, and it would help repopulate Georgia's eroding middle class. That is, when we start looking at what's happening to the middle class, it will begin to put people from the lower class, the working class Georgians, back up into the middle class and repopulate that segment of our population which we so desperately need to have. I'm happy to accept any questions from the committee.
Any questions from members of the committee for the author of this legislation? Chair recognizes Representative Tumlin.
Yes, will the low-income credit, the $20, for under 20,000 will still be retained too? Would this be an addition?
It would eliminate that, I believe, because it would
I haven't seen the bill, so.
I'm sorry.
So that would be eliminated, and this would be.
I believe it would be eliminated because of the way the numbers work. I don't think that that would have an effect anymore. I think that this would overshadow it and eliminate it. I'm not certain of that point, but that's my understanding at this time. That is a pretty small tax break, and I think this one overshadows it.
Yeah, but it does it or doesn't it?
I believe it does not.
It does not.
It does not have an effect any longer. That is, this would eliminate it.
16, who's that? Representative Sims.
You're saying that this shift is going to go to sales?
Yes.
What happens when sales go down? Sales are pretty. If you watch the line and if you watch anything on revenue streams, and sales tax is a very volatile issue. What happens when we have down sales and we don't have this revenue coming in?
When we have a down sales, the folks who are hit hardest are the low-income folks. They spend nearly 100% of the money that they get in their pocket in their local economies. And so whatever money that we're putting back into the state would actually work as an economic machine driving the state to $122 million. Poor folks don't save money. They spend it all. The fiscal note estimates that 40% of the money will in fact be spent on taxable items. That is, things that aren't taxed, rent, your mortgage, whatever, don't count. But the 40% of it will be spent on taxable items. All of the money will get spent. Folks who make less than $35,000 historically have nearly 0% savings. In fact, they carry debt. So sales up and down don't matter to this bill. The $122 million all goes back in.
Representative McKillop, I'm looking at the fiscal note that was dated December 22nd of 06, and I presume since this note was prepared that your legislation has been amended and you're submitting to this committee a committee sub. Did I hear you right?
I have had prepared and offered a committee substitute. The only thing the committee substitute does is eliminate the carry forward provision of the credit. That is, when Lake Council's office wrote it initially, they had a provision where it would carry forward, and any credit you couldn't take in this year would be carried forward to the next year. All the committee substitute did was eliminate that because there was a very large number at the bottom of the fiscal note that made it appear as though this would cost $2 billion in the long term. I eliminated that provision. The only change to the next fiscal note that you receive will be that last sentence will be eliminated from it. And the reason for that is they imagine that at some point in the future you'll be able to claim all of the earned income tax credit that you would otherwise be entitled to. That is not really the case because so few people who are actually poor ever manage to struggle their way out of poverty. So it wouldn't ever actually cost that much, but I wanted to eliminate any confusion.
And I realize we're going to amend this letter and another's been ordered, but did I hear you say it was your contention that the $122 million that this is going to cost from our revenues will be made up in sales tax?
No, sir. No, sir. I said the $122 million will historically all be spent in Georgia. The only amount that is applicable to sales tax would be approximately the 40% of the $122 million that folks spend on items that are taxable, and that is when you go to the clothing store or you go, you buy something that is a taxed item. That is only about $2 million. It is an economic driver. That is, it creates good, $122 million to our local economies, to our local restaurants, to all sorts of things. But it is not a dollar-for-dollar replacement by any means. I'm not suggesting that.
Okay. Any other questions for the author? We will assign your legislation to our income tax subcommittee, and certainly will be debated further. Then you'll contact secretary of this committee or the chairs of that committee, and you can set up some hearings in the future. Thank you very much for your presentation. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 30, please.
House Bill 30 by Representative Chambers of the 81st to amend Code Section 833 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to definition relating to housing authorities.
Okay. Chair recognizes Representative Jill Chambers.
Thank you, Mr.
Tell us
Chairman.
about it, Representative Chambers.
Thank you for having me here today. Mr. Chairman, esteemed members of the committee, I bring before you House Bill 30. It's a legislation to clarify the language on a private enterprise agreement for housing authorities. In 1996, the General Assembly passed legislation recognizing the public purpose fulfilled by housing authorities can include privately owned mixed-income housing developments, but it does not tell you exactly what type of agreement they may enter into, and this language just clarifies that a bit. The attached fiscal note on the bill is pretty clear. It says it's enabling legislation. It allows for a new kind of partnership for development and operation of projects that contain some portion of low-income housing. It does not force or require any action. It does not set goals or minimums for low-income housing construction, and it does not require or describe any kind of project or negotiating parameters for agreements. All it does is enable housing authorities to enter into private enterprise agreements for what is truly a public-private enterprise. It will hopefully provide more good quality low-income housing all across the state. An example of this is the East Lake Housing Project. They torn down, Atlanta Housing Authority tore down what was essentially a slum and built what looks like a post-type property now. They are able to put in stricter rules for example, no drug or criminal activity within the development, and it's just really done a great economic it's been a greatly economically added a lot of vitality to this community. If you go over to the East Lake community and you see new shopping centers, you see new housing, you see upgraded facilities for citizens' use, it's a great enabling piece of legislation, and I would appreciate your favorable consideration.
Members of the committee, I see number 15. Is that Representative Flood? Is that right? Okay. Other questions for the author of this legislation? It's obviously a very good presentation. You quieted the entire committee, which is a laudable event for us. We will assign your legislation to our Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee, and hopefully in the very near future we can get this heard in the subcommittee and back to the full committee for action. Thank you, Representative Chambers, for the very good presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, what number are you again?
Number 26.
26. Okay. House Bill 66, please.
House Bill 66 by Representative Davis of the 39th to amend Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to revenue and taxation so as to abolish the state income tax.
Chair recognizes Representative Davis to present his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring forth House Bill 66, which it will abolish all Georgia personal income taxes as well as all corporate income taxes and replace it with a sales tax base by doubling the amount of the state sales tax from 4% to 8%. Now, the bill will not change any of the current exemptions placed on sales tax. If you're paying tax on it now, you will be paying tax on it after this bill. Not affecting this legislation is I did not double the sales tax on motor fuel, leaving it at the standard 4%. I believe this bill promotes less government and more personal responsibility by reducing the burden of government to enforce the overly complicated tax system that we currently use. The government reduction would be substantial by eliminating the need for printing of forms, handling, postage, as well as the expense from personnel for just tax compliance and enforcement measures. Not to mention the millions of dollars that the everyday citizens they'll save in software and professional help that they need to provide us with the forms that we are asking for. I think there's a movement not only in Georgia but around this nation that we move away from a income-based taxation and move to a consumption-based, and I really believe that we should embrace this, and I'm be willing to take any kind of questions on it. But one more thing I wanted to say was, if this bill was enacted, it would give a 6% raise across the board to all tax-paying citizens of Georgia, and also reintroduce $8.9 billion into the Georgia economy. And I think that's a substantial point doing with this legislation. But I'll be happy to take any questions.
Questions for the author, Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You threw out some numbers that I wanted to just make sure I understood. You said this bill would allow for a 6% increase in personal income by Georgia citizens?
Yes, sir. By eliminating the 6% income, the 6% rate on income tax now that Georgia currently.
But that's offset by an additional 4% increase in sales tax.
Yes, sir.
So how is that a 6% increase if you take it away from one hand and put it back with the other?
They will have the choice on a sales tax-based taxation method. You will have the choice of purchasing or making purchases that would incur that taxation. So, but the raise will come in their paycheck. They will get all of their paycheck without any state income taxes based on it. That's where the 6% raise comes from.
Yeah, semantics. I would imagine it's been. And then you talked about a 6% increase. The previous bill had or two bills before had a provision that would allow for lower income people to gain more of their retain more of their income. You also mentioned that people in the low income bracket typically spend nearly 100% of their income on consumption items because they're negative savers. They're spending nearly 100% or more of their income on purchases and expenditures. Does that also mean that they would be getting a 6% increase if they're doubling their sales tax?
Well, I listened to that presentation. I also heard that 40% of it was the only amount that was actually being charged as sales tax because 60% of it was exempt from the sales tax. So not changing any of the exemptions, you're really, yes, they would have some measures on where they would have to pay tax in the back side of it. Obviously we still have needs of the state that we have to address, but at the same time, it's a fair tax, and it's simple and transparent to everyone that uses it.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Williams.
Representative Davis, on page 9, you're talking about local city and county taxes not exceed 16%. What's going to happen? What effect was this going to have on SPLOST and local option sales taxes? Are they going to be eliminated, or can they continue to enact SPLOST?
Well, they can continue with SPLOST. The raising that amount, there was a threshold in the code section, and that's one of the reasons the bill is so large. Is there's thresholds for such as hotel motel tax as well as SPLOST, and individual counties charge different rates. And this just capped it at. We added the 4% on to what was already there. So if it says 16%, it used to be 12, and we just raised it up to accommodate the 4% that we're adding.
Chair recognizes Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the gentleman, with the bill, you mentioned that it would, of course, take the 6% or up to 6% off the income, and that would be recapped in sales tax. This summer, two study committees went around the state, and Chairman O'Neill's Tax Reform Study Committee and Chairman Lewis, Business Incentives Tax Study Committee. And one of the things we heard from our businesses was that we were at a disadvantageous position in Georgia relative to our border states. And in fact, our border businesses were losing sales out of state, whereby Georgians could go across the state line and pay less sales tax on big-ticket items. How would the gentleman address the fact that if we double our sales tax, double the state portion of that, in some areas taking that up to 11%, and they're only paying 5 or 6% in South Carolina or Florida or Tennessee, how would the gentleman address those large ticket purchases moving out of state and taking their jobs and business with them?
Well, it depends on what the large purchases are. Obviously, we've got if they do a large purchase on a car, it's already addressed in the law. They still have to pay the Georgia income, the Georgia sales tax rather, on that already. Now, if you're talking about refrigerators or appliances or something like that, it's something that we need to. I apologize. That's something that we need to address and consider. However, there's other fair taxation modes right now in other border states. And some of the authors, co-signers on there are border county members. So there's issues that we need to look at with that and see how we can address it. But in general, the bill also eliminates corporate income tax. So it could be an enticement to bring more corporations into Georgia and develop it on another angle. So there's several different things going on there, but that's a tough issue, and that's something that we have to look at and address. And if there's some way we can overcome that, then we can do such.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 17, who's it? Representative Peak.
Question for you. Would the sales tax change to where it would be charged on services in the state, for instance, rents that you pay, or water fees, or CPA fees?
No, and I didn't get into the exemptions or change any of the services at all. I left it exactly the way it was. Every exemption you have now is every exemption that's going to be on this bill. I did not address not one exemption other than the motor fuel that is really not applicable with the income tax, but I didn't address the motor fuel.
Okay.
That's the only
Representative
one.
Sims.
Representative Davis, again, I asked the same question that I asked before. When you have a sales tax drawdown like they had in Tennessee, and they don't have an income tax up there, and I remember right, Mr. Chairman, I think they were in the red for about 3 years, weren't they? Or maybe 4 years. What do you do when you have when the sales tax goes down, when you fluctuate with these sales taxes? What do you do to make up the income? Where are we going to make it up?
Well, and that's one of the reasons that the state keeps a reserve. And yes, it fluctuates. And I heard your comments earlier, and I knew that was coming when I got up here. So, there's a lot to this bill and a lot of different ways we can look at it. But it's going to be an economic development driver, and I think it will increase the sales tax. And it's been nationally done. I mean, nationally, whenever you cut taxes, you actually increase the amount of tax collections. So, and that's on every level. So, that I don't know how I can answer that question other than you prepare for ups and downs in state. We do that now.
Let me also just state the committee, the purpose of this exercise in first readers is to give the author an opportunity to know what to prepare for in subcommittee and so forth. So we don't feel that you're just being attacked from every flank, but hopefully you'll use this as areas that you need to have a good, clear understanding of when you do present to the subcommittee and back to the full committee for full debate. I don't want to limit the debate here other than we're under some time restraints, so I'm going to take two more questions and then we'll assign this one, and I'm sure it's going to be deliberated long and hard in subcommittee before it's over with. Who's at 23? Representative Lewis.
Representative Davis, thank you for presenting that. Let me just say I appreciate your motivation and your concept here. I applaud you for bringing this forward. Just one question. I haven't read the bill and hadn't had a chance to go through it, but when you shift this burden to sales tax, I don't know if it's in the bill or if it's your intent that sales tax perhaps be redefined to where it's levied at the retail level only, where in some instances around the state we impose a sales and use tax on items that are not at a retail level. They may be arguably more at a wholesale level. Does your bill address that, or was any thought given to that approach?
No, sir, it was not, and it's not addressed in the bill at all.
Thank you.
Actually, I'll take two more since both these lights are on. Who's at 29? Representative Tumlin.
Representative Davis, I was on page 1, 4871, you say absolutely no taxes collected after 1108. How would that apply to people, say, that were non-filed for 2004 through 2007, or carry forward from their income tax? Would you just completely forgive all previous returns not found under this way this is written?
Well, I'm not looking at that verbiage right now, but the intent was not to. Well, maybe we used the wrong word at that very moment, but the point is not to charge any additional taxes after which we would still be able to collect past debt that's owed to the state. At least that's the intention that I had with the legislation.
Representative Jameson, is that right? Number 28?
Yes. Representative Davis, in compiling the fiscal note, do you know if they took into consideration that currently your state income tax, if you itemize your tax return, is a deduction? So you're actually saving a percentage of that state income tax by deducting it on the federal and the state tax return. Do you know if that was taken into consideration in developing the fiscal note?
I don't know that answer, but I do know that there's several issues addressed with the fiscal note that I would like to dispute when we get into full debate on it, but they didn't take a lot of things into consideration when they prepared the fiscal note.
Representative Davis, we thank you and laud your courage, and look forward to a very spirited debate on some very provocative legislation you brought forward. A good job, and thank you for appearing before the committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's a tough issue, so it wasn't going to be easy. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to assign this to the Tax Reform Subcommittee. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 67, please.
House Bill 67 by the Vice Chair Emeritus of this committee, Representative Martin, to amend Chapter 13, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated related to specific business and occupational taxes, and repeal the corporate net worth tax.
Chair recognizes Representative Chuck Martin for the purpose of summarizing, presenting his bill.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you today. What I have before the committee is a simple little matter, a one-page bill that seeks to eliminate the corporate net worth tax for the state of Georgia. This tax was implemented originally back in the 20s, sometime when the state was in dire need of funds. If you can see in the information I gave for you and Ms. Napier for the committee and can provide it later, everyone in Georgia that is a C Corp or an S Corp, as part of their tax filings, are required to pay a fee based on the net value of their company at the end of the year. And if you look at the table, we have people filing this return. If their net worth doesn't exceed $10,000, they still have to send the state $10. And if you'll go down the scale, it goes up to no one would ever send more than $5,000. So the tax is just, in my opinion, a bit dysfunctional, a bit archaic. And I think it's something that we could do without in Georgia. I think it would put C Corps and S Corps on a level playing field with LLCs, partnerships, and sole proprietorships. I don't have the fiscal note back as yet. However, last year, this tax raised, according to the Department of Revenue, about $35 million. So I assume our fiscal note is going to come back somewhere in that category. But would entertain any questions, and of course, we will await the fiscal note before moving forward when this is assigned to subcommittee to chair.
Actually, Chairman Martin, because we have such an efficient attorney in our committee, Ms. Napier, we do have a fiscal note.
We do have a fiscal note. I apologize. I didn't think she would be that efficient.
And as usual, you're...
No.
You were really doing good up to then.
Let me say that I didn't think she would be that efficient because all the work the chairs had her doing preparing the subcommittee. And Ms. Napier, we'd be glad to take you out to lunch later today.
Chairman Martin, that wasn't even a good try. Are there any questions for the author of this legislation? I can't imagine why not. I notice it's got some very prominent co-sponsors here with you, too. I look forward to a spirited debate on this very important legislation. Thank you for that presentation. We'll assign it to our Tax Reform Subcommittee, Chairman Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anything I can do to lighten the moment for you?
Mr. Secretary, 26 again. House Bill 78, please, sir.
Yes, sir. This is House Bill 78 by Chairman Emeritus Richard Royal of the 171st to amend Code Section 48.5.7.4 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to bona fide conservation use property.
The Chair recognizes the preeminent expert in the entire Southeast on conservation use covenants, Chairman Richard Royal, to present his legislation.
Thank you, I guess. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. This is simply a little housekeeping measure. As you know, that tax offices all across the state look for ways to call breaches of covenants for our people holding agricultural lands. I've had to introduce legislation in the past several years saying that fish ponds didn't constitute a breach, corn maze didn't constitute a breach. This legislation just says any kind of agritourism does not constitute any kind of breach of the covenant. The definition for agritourism is shown in B. fiscal note shows it to be very little, if any, loss to the state, and very little loss to the local governments. I guess I represent as much conservation use property in the state of Georgia and in my district, and I don't even see that this would be applicable down there, so I don't think there'd be any substantial loss anywhere. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for the author of this legislation? Mr. Chairman, that probably will come as no surprise to you. We will assign this to the ad valorem tax subcommittee.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, House Bill 86, please.
House Bill 86 by Representative Forster III to amend Code Section 48727, the official code of Georgia annotated, related to computation of taxable net income.
Chair's really been looking forward to this one. We recognize Representative Ron Forster to present his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a one-sentence bill here. One sentence. You'll see on HB 86, it says 12.1, retirement or compensation received as retirement benefits from the military services of the United States of America and survivor benefits derived therefrom. What this bill does, it exempts military retirement from income tax. In Georgia, we had the benefit of increasing in our military standings, while other states had a decrease in the base closings. In Georgia, we have an income tax which was submitted to be removed by several people before me, and that income tax, being on retirement, has taken our military veterans to move to Tennessee or to Florida or to Texas or somewhere where it's not income tax, because as an enlisted, if I'd stayed in for 20 years, my retirement benefit would have been anywhere from $1,100 to $1,500 a month. Now, tax on top of that, it reduces my benefit down to $900 or $1,000 or so. And to move from Georgia, from the state that I'd been in for most of my life, to Tennessee, to save that extra $300, $400, $500 a month is an obvious benefit, obvious reason why. So what this bill simply does is remove income tax on retired military. And we have several examples of, down in South Georgia, I believe we have people that have a homestead in Florida and live there part of the year just to avoid this specific case. But simply put, that's my bill, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate y'all's consideration on it, and I'm looking forward to the debate coming up.
Thank you, Representative Forster. I do have a couple of questions. I understand we have a fiscal note order.
Yes, sir. I have a fiscal note
on this. Are there any age limit? I mean, the tax relief sought in your legislation is the retirement stream period without any age accomplishment to it. In other words,
that's correct.
It's not age 60. A lot of retired military folks are in their 40s.
Yes, sir. I would have been 39 if I would have stayed in for 20.
Are you aware that any other states have taken a similar action to this?
States that have an income tax? There's several states that are moving to remove the income tax totally itself. But as far as specific for military, I'd have to do some research and get back with you, and I'd submit that to the subcommittee.
I'm told by some that the logic for this is that the annuity, if you will, income, which the retirement is, was not earned in Georgia because when you're in the military, you're said to be on a national reservation, so to speak, and not within any given state.
Yes, sir.
And it's really not fair to let Georgia tax earnings that took place outside of the state of Georgia. That's what those I've heard have argued. Are you espousing that same theory as far as the
I fully
equity
agree
or
with
fairness?
the chairman of the Appropriations Committee on this bill.
Are there any questions for the author? Representative Flood, you're number 15, is that right?
Thank you. Just one question. Would this have any means testing for income, so it would apply to any retirement benefits at any income level?
No, sir. No means testing. You did your military service. You served your country until retirement. Then, as the chairman said, you weren't specifically designated for Georgia during your military, so there's no reason for us to tax it. So, no means test.
Other questions? Representative Sims?
Question, and I've read through this again, and one of the things that you've been mentioning, would this be reported income? In other words, if someone was retired, decided to have another job in Georgia, would this be reported income or non-reported income on their income tax form when they send it in? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how they're going to, they get their check, but their monthly check, whatever. But let's say they're working for a company. How are they going to do this? It's not going to report it.
Well, that's
non-reportable. I mean, that's one question about that.
Yes, sir. It's an excellent question, Representative Sims. That would be up to the Department of Revenue of how they'd want to handle whether they wanted it on their income tax form for any kind of military requirement or not, just to show that the income was there. Since we're not taxing it in the first place, I would say no.
Typically, a retirement is paid directly from the federal government. It would not go through a state job, but you've got an ex-CPA right next to you there. Why don't you ask him after the meeting's over there? You can do that.
Just asking.
Thank you. Any
I
other
appreciate
questions?
Representative Sims' support of this bill. As you can see, he's one of the signers.
We will assign this to our income tax subcommittee and look forward to debating this in the future. Thank you, Representative Forster. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 124, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. HB 124 by Representative Stevens of the 164th to amend Part 1, Article 2, Chapter 5, Title 48 of Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to ad valorem tax exemptions.
Chair recognizes the distinguished chairman of our Industry, Trade, and Tourism Committee in the House, Representative Ron Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As many of you that have been on this committee for quite some time probably recognize this bill. It's come before you before. We are the only state in the South who has an ad valorem inventory tax on business. There is no other state that surrounds us that has this egregious, outdated tax on inventory. We have taken a piecemeal approach through the state year after year to exempt certain high-ticket items to eliminate them from inventory tax. This is a tax base essentially that it is based strictly and only on your inventory. It also extends to your office supplies that you might use in your office that you pay year after year after year. We've had some testimony over the summer from some of our furniture industries that heavily hit with this particular tax, who has to keep their inventory in another state, the large bulk of their inventory. And as many of you might know, some of these furniture dealers now have showrooms, and then we'll just ship it into you, to your area. It's something that I believe it's anti-business. It makes us less competitive to some of our other states, especially if you're one of these fringe cities that all over the state and trying to compete with those states who do not have this inventory tax. As the larger ticket item gets, the less competitive you become. So I hope that this committee will consider and find some way for us to finally get rid of this antiquated tax in the state of Georgia.
Representative Stevens, do you know if there's a fiscal note on this yet, or is one ordered?
One has not. It's ordered, but we have not got it yet.
And isn't it true that most, if not all, of this tax goes to local governments and not state government?
It does, and I'm going to rely on the committee's wisdom to see how we replace that lost revenue from to the counties, and it will be a lost revenue.
And cities as well, I think,
and
in many cases, right? Are there other questions? Thank you for that presentation. School boards, right? Representative Flood.
Is there a definition for tangible personal property?
That definition's not in the bill. I believe it's in the code. Yeah, it's in the code.
Could you be more specific?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out why personal property is constituted as business property.
Are you talking about like the
On
office
912.
furniture that?
Well, I'm just saying, on line 12, all tangible personal property constituting the inventory of a business. Why would personal property be considered in the inventory of a business?
Therein lies part of the problem. Is real property. Keep in mind, again, if you buy office furniture that you're using for your business, it is also taxed as an inventory tax, as long as it's there.
Representative Jameson, could you enlighten us on that? I'm a little confused by that language. Please, thank you.
Representative Flood, there's two categories of property that's taxed by your local tax assessors and your local governments. There's real property, which of course is dirt and buildings. And then there's personal property, which is made up of equipment, inventory, vehicles, and so forth. It in no way, the term personal property in no way refers to personal in our homes or anything. It's just a way for the local tax assessors to define a difference between buildings and land and equipment and vehicles. And it is defined, you are defining it, Representative Stevens. The part of personal property that you're addressing is the inventory only, not equipment and so forth. I noticed.
Thank you. Other questions for the author of the bill? Chair sees none. We're going to be assigning that to our ad valorem tax subcommittee. Thank you, Chairman Stevens, for that presentation. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 173, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. HB 173 by Representative Holmes of the 61st to amend Chapter 8, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to sales and use tax so as to authorize the imposition of the local option sales and use tax for transportation.
Chair represents the gentleman from Fulton County, I believe, Representative Holmes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here today to introduce a matter that has been discussed by a lot of different interest groups for the last several months, and some of you may be aware of the fact that I introduced House Bill 1382 last year, and this is basically just a new installment of that particular measure. And I have a gentleman here with me who knows more about has forgotten more about transportation than I'll ever know, Emory McClinton, who is the member of the DOT board from the 5th District, and he will answer any questions that I don't know the answers to. But this matter deals with the problem that all of you are aware of, because you got a letter from Chairman Evans, the chair of the DOT board, indicating this unbelievable shortfall of $7.7 billion in terms of funding, things that weren't going to make it into the short-range plan but would be in the long-range plan, which means they are unlikely to be funded for the simple reason as the cost of construction and asphalt and everything else goes up, and particularly the land acquisition for right-of-way, that you're going to have these things who would be longer than 6 years coming into being, actually doubling in cost or more in many instances. So this shows me that there is a crisis, and Mr. McClinton brought this matter to our attention. He's had meetings with and been educating several from different counties, particularly in the metropolitan area. And I'm pleased to say that 7 of the 10 Atlanta Regional Commission county chairmen of delegations here in the House are also co-sponsors of this particular bill. But very briefly, what the bill does, it provides for a local option transportation splosh. And what it would do would be to divide that splosh, a half cent for regional measures and a half cent for local measures. And it would also extend the time. As you know, most of the splashes now go for 5 years for schools and things of that nature. This could go up to as much as 20 years. The funds that will be generated by this, and this is something that is in the bill, if you look at page 4, where it says when the matter is put on the ballot, and since this is local option splosh, it says, shall a 1% sales and use tax be imposed in the name of the county for a period of time not to exceed, as I said, 5 to 20 years perhaps, and for raising not more than an estimated amount of funds for the purpose of. So you would identify the projects, you would identify the approximate amount of money, and I'd just like to indicate this, that it's for use by rural as well as urban, political jurisdictions, because obviously there is a need, growing need in rural areas as well. Many of you are familiar with the Section 18 rural transportation money that the feds provide, and it's something that we have many of our citizens who don't have access to private vehicles who could, in fact, make use of this as well. But in terms of the distribution of the funds, they would be for regional transit, as indicated. These would be for, counties, for regional entities such as MARTA, such as Gerda, and even for commuter rail. And then local, transit could be used, within cities or counties for their own particular transit system. It could also provide for funds to connect to regional transit systems, and it could also, of course, be used for local projects, ranging from building bicycle paths to repaving roads to sidewalks or whatever. It could also be used for matching funds, for buses and trains and for some of the federal matches, that we need. And so you can see that it provides a great deal of flexibility with regard to how these funds can be used, the half cent for regional related matters, the half cent for local related matters. And just to give you an idea, I'm just going to give you some estimates because we just did it for the ARC 10 regional counties, but we would, of course, this would be done for the individual counties in terms of, as we always do when we have a new measure, approximately how many dollars can be expected to be collected under it. Starting from the largest in the metro area, Fulton would collect, and this would be over a 6-year period, approximately $1.2 billion. Gwinnett would collect approximately $720 million. Cobb, $705, with DeKalb, $567, Cherokee, $129, Clayton, $284, Henry, $106, and Rockville, $88. So these are some ideas about what, in fact, it would be collected. Approximately $2.2 billion during this particular time that would be used for transportation-related, matters, and an annual collection of about $333 million over these particular time periods, which about $667 million could be used for the annually, and a total of $4 billion over the 6-year period. So I've given you a very broad brushstroke indication of what this matter could in fact do. We know that the Chamber of Commerce and other individuals have been particularly concerned about this matter, but I think there is a need for this dialogue to begin for the simple reason, as I said, that $7.7 billion shortfall is going to affect every single county in the state, and they would have an opportunity through the local referendum to, in fact, provide for this special purpose local option transportation plan. And as I said, I'd be glad to try to answer any questions. If I can't, then certainly Mr. McClinton, who has been involved in transportation for more than 45 years and been on the board now for 3 terms and worked for the Federal Highway Works Administration, I think, for 35 or 40 years. So he's the expert.
Thank you, Representative Holmes. We certainly are grateful to Mr. McClinton being with us as well, and I hope you'll be back as this bill goes through the committee system, because I would imagine that your expertise will be very valuable in the analysis of this legislation. Chair recognizes Representative Sims, I think, had a question.
Thank you for your great explanation.
Pull your mic up a little bit to you, if you would. Thank you.
Representative Holmes, on this, when you're saying you're going to create an authority, let's say in a rural area, because that's where I'm from. I know you're from an urban area, and I'm from a rural area. So you got 2 counties down there that want to go together. But what if one county's only got 7,000 folks and the other county's got 45,000 folks, and the one big county wants to do this, and the little county really doesn't want to do this, but it's imposed on them?
No, sir. Nothing is imposed on this. Remember, this is a local option for every single county. And as you said, if some of them, and that's the hope of this, that because of just like the school system, when you have counties coming together to set up their high school, you'd also have this with regard to, as I said, some perhaps regional transit systems. So the only way that this thing could be imposed, if you think the MARTA example, remember? Only 2 of the counties of the 5 that are regionally in the bill were in fact amenable, so that's why it's only here. That's why you don't have Clayton, why you don't have Gwinnett, and you don't have Cobb as a part of MARTA. So they cannot be forced to do this. It's an individual, independent decision by the voters of each county.
Representative Royal.
Representative Holmes, this is an additional 1% tax. It can be over the plus education, and so it could be up to 4% How does MARTA work in that? Could it be 5% local taxes in the metro area?
Yeah, actually, I think it is currently 5%.
Or 6 with the sewer tax?
Yes.
Thank you.
But again, the people make this decision. It's not imposed on them. It's not a mandate.
Thank you, Representative Holmes. We look forward to further debate on this bill. I'm going to assign it to our sales tax subcommittee, and hopefully we'll be debating that in the very near future. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Mr. Secretary, moving along, we have 10 minutes left, and hopefully we're going to achieve our ambitious agenda. House Bill 187, please, sir.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. It is HB 187 by Representative Scott II to amend Part 2, Article 3, Chapter 8, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to sales tax for education purposes.
I'd say I would be glad to let you present from your seat since you have a microphone there to expedite matters. I recognize you to present your bill.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. This bill has two purposes. The first purpose is to enable school districts to use the money collected during an E-Splost for the purpose of all capital outlays that are directly related to the building of this school, of any proposed school. It expands the use of capital outlays for the project to go beyond just the school building and the immediate landscaping and things of that nature, to go to, say, a safety sidewalk that's necessary to be built as a result of the building of the school, but would not have been necessary had the school not been built. The second provision in this bill is to mandate that if an E-Splost special election occurs, then it must occur on a general election date. If the school board is proposing a special election for the E-Splost, if they propose a special election for the E-Splost, it has to occur on the general election date, or the school system will have to pay for the special election out of the E-Splost proceeds. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Sims.
I've just got on this. This would, so what you're saying is that the E-Splost would also, if you need access and egress lanes into your school system, which they're not right now funded with the E-Splost. Is that correct? Like if you had a lane that for buses to turning lanes basically turn out and turn in to the school system, they're not covered at this time. Is that correct?
It is my belief that it's not currently forbidden. However, there are attorneys who would argue that it is, and what this does is it clarifies the code so as to say that if a turn lane for a school bus is necessary after the building of the school, and that building of the school is part of the E-Splost, that the school system can. It doesn't say they have to, but they can include any project improvements, not system improvements, and the code is very clear on that. System improvements might be an improvement. They would upgrade the sewer system or something of that nature, whereas a project improvement would have to be something that is specifically related to the project of the building of the school. And yes, that would be allowed for the school system to put that into their E-Splost, whereas right now some would contend, or many would contend, that it's not allowed.
Thank you.
I look forward to further debate on this, and I see this as potentially making our areas around our schools far safer for our youngsters in this state, and I certainly applaud the gentleman for bringing this legislation. We'll be assigning this to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. Now, Mr. Secretary, doing triple duty, House Bill 189, please.
House Bill 189 by Representative Smith, the 131st, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to the imposition of sales and use tax so as to change certain provisions.
Chair recognizes Representative Smith from Muskogee County, I believe.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very easy piece of legislation in that it just broadens the wording that would be acceptable to the Department of Revenue for sales, or the exemption of sales and use tax. The last time we presented this, or the last session, it was thought that it included the language similar to or equivalent to the aquarium language, but it was much more restrictive, so this kind of opens it up a little bit to allow it to meet the guidelines of the aquarium.
Any question? Chair recognizes 24. Who's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Any questions? Thank you, Representative Smith. We'll be assigning that to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Secretary, House Resolution 3, please.
H.R. 3 by Representative Lindsay of the 54th, proposing an amendment to the Constitution so as to provide for limitations upon the rate of increase of the assessed value of real property for state, county, municipal, education, ad valorem purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe most of y'all are familiar with this bill as it passed out of y'all's Ways and Means Committee in the last session, unanimously, I might add, underneath the heading of H.R. 162. It enjoys broad support, both in terms of bipartisan support from over 37 House members, also cross-geographical support from around the state. I would also add that it enjoys the support of 9 members of this committee as co-sponsors. The bill is presently written with the help last year of what we worked on, thanks to the tutelage of Professor Richard Royal, in regards to setting this bill in the proper dynamics. What simply do is set up a cap on property tax reassessments at no more than 3% of the rate of inflation per year for real property in the state of Georgia. It is a long overdue measure. Over 30 states in the United States have some kind of similar measure in place. What it simply will do is make sure that we tax individuals' real property based on their investment in their property and not on some unrealized gain calculated by a local tax assessor.
Questions from any members of the committee? Chair seeing none, we will assign this to, we do? Did I hear one? No? Ad valorem tax subcommittee, Chairman Royal's committee.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask, well, I believe the tradition of this committee is that constitutional amendments will be worked on in the committees during the even years when it will go on the ballot. Is that right? Is that your intention? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative Lindsay. Well, yeah. One item of housekeeping, too. Each of the subcommittee chairs received today your appointment. I'm assuming everybody's that's appointed as a subcommittee chair is going to accept those chairmanships. I hope you will, and I'm looking forward to your great service to this committee. I would tell you each that you will need to, at least as it relates to quorums for your subcommittees, that's the only rule that I know of that must be repeated every 2-year session by the subcommittee chairman, where you institute what you want your respective quorums to be in your subcommittee. So I would suggest that you take care of that at your initial meetings when we begin to deliberate these bills. Is there any other business to come before the full Ways and Means Committee meeting today? I think we're going to be trying to meet again on Thursday of this week. I don't know if you've been listening to the assignments from the chair in the House, but there's a lot of legislation in this committee, and I expect it to be well into the hundreds before much of February finishes. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. Our goal this year, we don't want one single unintended consequence to come out of this committee. I need all your help, commitment, and prayers for that to happen. This stuff's very complicated, but I thank you for your good work today and your commitment to the people that you represent. And if I hear no other business come before the committee, we are considered adjourned.